Nacho man, yeah. I got to be a Nacho man, to be a Nacho man. I got to be a Nacho man.
Welcome, Vault Dwellers. My name is Nacho Bidness, and today we're going to do part 2 of our series on color changing light boxes. Part 1 covered the very basics of how to make a light box change colors, and if you're interested in that, you can go take a look at that video. Today we're going to expand on that theme and cover how to do this for an entire light box wall. We're also going to talk about some tips and tricks for large scale wiring projects and how to manage those. I think that this would look great in a home plate build. I have seen a lot of light box walls in home plate builds, but none of them do anything as cool as this one. In fact, I would do it myself, except that I have already done a home plate build that I'm very proud of and frankly don't want to mess with. But I think this could go well in any kind of lounge area, that kind of stuff, and certainly adds some wow factor and some pop to settlements if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. This is going to be a more advanced tutorial than the first video in this series for expert players who have already mastered the basics of working with electronics in Fallout 4. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. I have already done some preparation in getting ready for this. If you recall from the first video in the series, the true secret of color changing light boxes is the light boxes don't actually change color at all. It is all a trick of Place Anywhere as available on PC and Xbox One. And that means that for a 4-color light box wall, I am going to need 4 walls already set up so that we can basically paste them on top of each other. I've got 3 of them here, and the 4th is on the beach over here, and I'll explain why in a minute. Meanwhile, I did want to point out that I did not go through and individually select colors when it came to programming these light box walls. I am much too lazy for that. If we hook a terminal to any light box, as long as they're all strung together, we are in fact able to program them all simultaneously. Let me demonstrate that here. I've just got this very small generator, and we're going to hook that terminal up there and get in here and program all of the connected light boxes to a single color. As I have said many times in the past, I always recommend programming all logic elements in isolation with a dedicated terminal and generator, and then they don't have to all have enough power to all run, they just have to be connected. By the way, I've chosen the normal red. Bright tends to be too washed out to be able to see. There we go, and if I get back into build mode, we can see that if I disconnect the wire there and instead hook up some other light box elsewhere, that all the light boxes in this wall have been programmed. Again, just a recommendation that we always do this kind of thing in isolation. Now, we have 35 light boxes right here. To cover a standard sized wall out of the metal or wood tab takes a wall that is 7 boxes wide by 5 boxes tall. If we want to sink this into a wall so that we can wire from the back side, we can't use Place Anywhere, because once we group select something, Place Anywhere is no longer available to us. So we are going to have to resort to a good old vanilla glitch here. We're going to use ourselves a nice pillar glitch to group select this and set it into the wall that I have prepared over here. And this is why I had to have this last wall over on the beach over there, because if I tried to group select over here on my giant concrete platform, I would end up accidentally group selecting the entire platform. So we're just gonna try and get that guy sunk in and try and get it centered up. There we go. And good enough. And if we are very careful with exactly how we place our initial wall here, we can even do things like snap floors to the bottom and roofs to the top and additional walls to the side. And so that's why I recommend a 7-column, 5-row wall in order to cover a standard sized wall piece. Now that we have our first wall in place, let's take a look back here, because I have already set up for conduits with the different colors that I'm going to be using. Once we have all of these walls connected and placed anywhere and pasted on top of each other, it's going to be very difficult to grab exactly the light box that I want when I want to grab it, so that I can animate everything in the order that I would like the colors to go. And so that brings me to my first point that I wanted to make when it comes to large wiring projects like this. If you are going to get into tight spaces or have things overlap where you know in advance that it's going to be difficult to grab exactly what you want, just set yourself a little conduit a little bit further out and label it so that you can tell which one is which, and you don't have to remember that for yourself later. These little metal letters are really handy when it comes to labeling things so that you can find them later. The next point that I wanted to make about these large wiring projects is, if you look very carefully at each one of these light box walls, I have gone, that one's going off to the conduit over there, but otherwise these are very neatly wired and in series. They just go across and come down, and then they'll go across and go down. And I did each of these walls identically, where I started at the top right from behind and went across and down and back. I do that because once everything is in place, it's going to be much easier to tell what's happening by doing my wiring neatly. The other thing that I'll mention when it comes to these light box walls especially is you don't want extra wires and unnecessary wires. For example, this one that goes across pretty much the whole screen. That's a bad idea, because if I come back and I want to do something like animate individual rows or something later, having that cross connected is really going to mess me up. I'm going to have a hard time finding that wire in all of the mess of the animation gear, and I'll be tearing my hair out trying to figure out why that wire or why that animation wouldn't work. Another thing that I'll point out is that with these light box walls, it is very tempting to go like I have here and just wire to all adjacent light boxes. There's no need to do that. There is no purpose to it. And in fact, because the game has to keep track of all those extra wires, it does mean that it's going to slow your game down. You're going to have additional stutter and lag by having wires in there that you don't need. So that is another point that I wanted to make, in that try not to wire any more than you absolutely have to. If you can get away with one wire instead of 4 to do the same thing, do it, because you will save on your settlement size bar and your processor resources. I'm going to disconnect these walls from the power that they're hooked up to, because I think that it's just better to, in general, do your work with stuff unpowered. Won't really matter for this particular project, but in general, if you've got switches and interval switches and all kinds of things that are happening automatically, sometimes you may end up having things happen that you didn't intend if you're working with the power on. So I always recommend isolating everything and removing all power from what you're working on until you're ready to start up your contraption. You can see that I have just copied the position of this row 1, column 1 light box, and I'm going to come over here and paste that position onto the next one. Rather than do a entire wall and then come back and do the next wall, I am going to paste all 3 of these all at once. It's just a lot less time in the menus. After all, with there being 35 light boxes per color, that means that I am going to have to do this copy and paste a total of 115 times. It's not hard, but it is very tedious. And I'm not going to make you watch that, so I will join you again here momentarily. I have completed moving over the first 2 rows of my lightbox wall, and this seemed like a good time to cover a couple of more tips and tricks when it comes to these large wiring projects. You can see that I have all of these wires just floating out here in the middle of nowhere, and that's because anytime we use Place Anywhere, whether it's for a copy and paste or using the more traditional Place Anywhere functionality, wires do not update. Now, when it's an individual piece, we can simply grab and release, and the wires will update. However, what do we do for this, where we've got all of these light boxes stacked on top of each other? It's very difficult to make sure that you've actually grabbed all 4 of those light boxes. What we can do is go to Object Properties and Disable Object, and we can do that 3 times because there are 4 light boxes here. We don't have to actually disable the last light box because we can grab and release it and guarantee that wires will update. Then we can go back in and enable all of the disabled objects. That will allow us to make sure that all of those wires get updated. After all, I need to do this for this row in order to even be able to grab the next row of light boxes so that I can get to pasting on the next row. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that I think that it's very important to test early and test often. It's much easier to fix things in progress than wait until the very end in most cases. Our red is still working correctly, and even though I expected it would be, I wanted to check it just to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes. When I go to hook up my yellow, we can see that I have made a mistake. I did not get this last light box in the proper position on the wall. So let me grab this one and get this onto my clipboard. And then we need to try and figure out where is the light box that's wrong, and that's going to be tricky. One thing that we can do is move our cursor around until we see a green lightning bolt. That means that since only the yellow is active, I am currently hovering on one of those yellow light boxes. If I'm lucky, it's the one. Nope. If I was lucky, it would have been the one that I needed to move. It was a 50-50 shot, but oh well. Now we can come over here, and this is definitely the one that I want. So I am going to paste that into the correct position, and I'm going to now move this other one that I had to pull out back into place. You can imagine that if I was trying to do this at the end with the possibility of additional mistakes and maybe something's not on the right row or who even knows what happens, it's much harder to fix things that way. Now, I still have quite a bit of copy pasting to go, and once I am done, we're going to come back and I will show you how to animate this thing like we had at the start of the video. We are on the home stretch when it comes to this lightbox wall. I have finished putting everything into place, and I have tested everything. Everything is working correctly so far, and I have reprogrammed the white section to be purple. I'm a little disappointed. I had planned to actually mix the colors together to get some different effects and give an illusion of additional complexity. It is no accident that I chose red, yellow, and blue, the primary colors, to be the main steps of my animation here. Unfortunately, as it turns out, mixing the colors does not really give the desired effect. I mean, that is orange-ish, but let's see if I can disconnect that wire with the thing on screen, and if we disconnect, you might see that it's slightly different, but certainly not a stunning effect by any means. Meanwhile, mixing yellow and blue gives a very, very bright greenish, minty sort of thing. Certainly not what I was looking for or hoping for. So that's why I've gone and changed the last step to be purple, because at least that way we move from the top of the spectrum to the bottom of the spectrum as we step through the animation. I've also installed a light in here just so we can see what we're doing. That's running off of this conduit here. We'll move that to a better spot later. And I have installed a switch. I have never regretted having a switch in place in order to turn my gadgets on and off. But there have certainly been times when I regretted not having a switch. So I always recommend having a switch in place to turn your stuff on and off. Now I have already exited the build mode and turned this switch to the off position, because I never recommend doing your wiring with power in your circuits. I always say to turn everything off. It's important, for example, with these interval switches and combined with power counters, because if I tried to wire that interval switch while it was actually activated, the power counters would be moving, and there'd be no way that I could keep this nice 3-2-1-0 sequencing that I need for the animation to proceed properly. All that's left now is to wire this thing up to each of the power counters. Again, this is exactly what we did in part 1 of the series, so if you'd like a more detailed explanation about why we're doing it this way, you can go check that video out. I am using the standard interval switches and power counters here for a couple of reasons. One, just because I wanted to make it so that to do this build, the only mod that was required was place anywhere. And two, because I'm going to demonstrate something here in a minute about what happens when we're careless with lighting and all of these other things that throw fields, because the power counters and the interval switch throw an electrical field just like a conduit. For now though, let's go ahead and exit the build mode and turn our switch on and check to see if everything is working. So we had red, yellow, and then we've got blue, and finally we're going to have purple. Perfect. Everything is working exactly as intended. So let's get ready to close this thing up. Okay, so I already know that this conduit is going to be a problem when I go move this piece into place. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that off and bring this over here. And you know, what would happen if I was to accidentally grab, oh, see? Gosh darn, my light is now blinking. See, this is what I was getting at with using the standard pieces when it comes to power counters, interval switches, delay on and delay off. I strongly recommend using the electronics mod because it has all of the same pieces, but it also has these insulated switches. And the great thing about an insulated switch is that if you're working in an area that already has lighting, you're not going to accidentally mess with that lighting. These insulated pieces have 0 radius on their fields, and that makes them extremely useful because if you're working in an area that's already lit and you're doing something complicated, you're almost guaranteed to accidentally at some point mess up your lighting, unless you're using insulated parts, in which case it's just not going to happen. And let's go ahead and get that last piece in there. Actually, let's go ahead and get rid of that light. We don't need that blinking light anymore. And put the last piece in, and that's it. We are totally done. Certainly I hope that in this long rambling video that there have been some little tips and tricks that you have found useful, and if you did, be sure to hit the like button. Next video in the series is going to cover some more advanced animation techniques because while this is okay, I think we can do better. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe and ring the bell so that you'll get that. And finally, if you did not like, please tell me why in a comment so that I can try and do better for you next time. Until next time, my name is Nacho Bidness, and I'm saying it's a great big wasteland out there. Let's go have fun in it.